The strangest thing about betrayal is that it rarely arrives wearing a mask. Sometimes it stands right in front of you, smiling, while it quietly waits for the perfect moment to take away everything you've built. My name is Rachel Morgan, and 5 years ago, I walked away from a relationship that nearly convinced me I wasn't capable of standing on my own. Leaving Vanessa Reed was the hardest decision I'd ever made, but opening my antique shop in Charleston, South Carolina, was the best one. Every display shelf, every restored lamp, every vintage clock lining those walls represented something far more valuable than inventory. They represented freedom. They represented proof that I could rebuild my life without someone constantly telling me what I was doing wrong. For almost 2 years, things had been going well. Not perfect, but steady. My shop sat on a charming corner just 3 blocks from the waterfront. Tourists wandered in searching for unique treasures. Locals stopped by for conversation and coffee. I finally felt like my life belonged to me again. Then one Tuesday morning, everything changed. I arrived at the shop just after 7. The sun was barely rising over the harbor, casting long golden reflections across the empty streets. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I noticed the front door was slightly open. My stomach tightened instantly. I knew I had locked it the night before. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, keys still in my hand, staring at that narrow gap. A cold breeze slipped through the doorway. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. When I stepped inside, my heart nearly stopped. Several display cases had been overturned. Glass covered the hardwood floor like scattered ice. Shelves that had been carefully arranged the night before now sat empty. Decorative pieces lay damaged or missing. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I couldn't even think. 5 years of work seemed to collapse around me in complete silence. Then I noticed something even worse. My office computer was gone. The backup hard drive was gone too. Every customer record. Every inventory file. Every business document. Gone. My hands began shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. While calling the police. As I waited for officers to arrive, I walked through the wreckage in a daze. The grandfather clock near the entrance still ticked steadily, completely unaware that my world had just fallen apart. I remember staring at its swinging pendulum and wondering how something could keep moving forward when everything else felt broken. The police arrived quickly. They asked questions. Took photographs. Collected fingerprints. But even before they left, I could see it in their expressions. There wasn't much to go on. No obvious suspects. No witnesses. No immediate answers. By noon, the story somehow became even worse. My website went offline. My business social media accounts were locked. Customers started calling about strange emails they had received overnight. Some claimed their orders had been cancelled. Others were told the store was permanently closing. I sat behind a borrowed folding table in the middle of my damaged shop trying to understand how one disaster had multiplied into 10. And then my phone buzzed. A text message. No name attached. Just a single sentence. Looks like your fresh start didn't last very long. I read those words 3 times. My blood ran cold. Because there was only one person I knew who would say something like that. And for the first time that morning, I stopped wondering who had done this. Instead, I found myself asking a far more dangerous question. How far was Vanessa willing to go? For the next 2 days, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw shattered glass, empty shelves, and that anonymous message glowing on my phone screen. The police continued their investigation, but updates were scarce. No arrests. No suspects. No breakthroughs. Just paperwork and polite promises. Meanwhile, my business was bleeding. Customers kept calling about strange emails. Some had received refund notices I never sent. Others were warned that my shop was involved in fraudulent sales. By Thursday morning, nearly a third of my upcoming orders had been cancelled. I sat behind my desk with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring at numbers that seemed to get worse every hour. Then another message arrived. This time, it came from a different number. Maybe some people are not meant to succeed. My stomach dropped. The wording was different, but the feeling was exactly the same. Whoever was doing this wanted me to know they were watching. The frightening part was not the message itself. It was how personal it felt. As the day dragged on, I found myself thinking about Vanessa more than I wanted to admit. For years, I had trained myself not to. After our breakup, I worked hard to build distance between us. New routines. New friends. A new business. A new life. But Vanessa had always struggled with letting things go. Looking back, there had been warning signs everywhere. If I spent time with friends, she wanted to know where I was. If something good happened in my life, somehow the conversation always shifted back to her. At first, I mistook that behavior for love. Later, I realized it was control. When I finally ended the relationship, she seemed calm on the surface. Too calm. She simply smiled and told me I would regret it. At the time, I thought it was just bitterness. Now I was not so sure. That afternoon, my friend Daniel stopped by the shop. He owned a small technology consulting company across town and had helped me with my website years earlier. As soon as he walked in, he could tell I was exhausted. "Rachel, you look like you have not slept in a week," he said. "Feels longer than that," I replied. After listening to everything that had happened, Daniel asked a question nobody else had asked. "Do you have any reason to believe this is personal?" I hesitated. Saying Vanessa's name out loud somehow made the possibility feel more real. When I finally told him about the messages and our history, he became very quiet. Then he asked to see my email logs. 20 minutes later, he found something interesting. Several unauthorized login attempts had targeted my business accounts during the past month. Not days. Not weeks. A month. Whoever was behind this had been planning for a long time. My pulse quickened as he scrolled through the records. Then he froze. "Rachel," he said carefully. "There is something else." He turned the screen toward me. A recovery email address had appeared in one of the account changes. Most of it was hidden behind security settings. But the visible letters were enough. I recognized them instantly. Because they matched an email address Vanessa had used for years. For the first time, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt certainty. But certainty was not proof. And proof was exactly what I needed. I stared at the screen for what felt like an hour, even though only a few seconds had passed. The partial email address sat there like a ghost from a life I had spent years trying to leave behind. Daniel leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. Neither of us said anything immediately. We both understood the same problem. Suspicion was not evidence. A familiar email pattern was not enough to convince the police, a judge, or anyone else. It was enough to keep me awake at night, but not enough to prove what had happened. "You need something concrete," Daniel finally said. I nodded slowly. He was right. The frustrating part was that I already knew Vanessa well enough to predict her next move. She hated being ignored. She hated losing control. Most of all, she hated seeing someone move forward without her. If she was behind all this, she would not stop simply because she had caused damage. People like Vanessa did not want closure. They wanted attention. Over the next week, I focused on rebuilding what I could. The website came back online. New passwords were created. Customers received updates explaining the technical problems. Many were surprisingly supportive. Some even stopped by the shop just to check on me. Their kindness helped more than they realized. Still, every time the front door opened, I felt a small knot form in my stomach. I kept expecting another problem to appear. Another message. Another surprise. Then on Friday afternoon, it happened. I was helping a customer examine a vintage brass telescope when my phone vibrated. Unknown number. My chest tightened instantly. After the customer left, I opened the message. You always were good at pretending everything is fine. My hands grew cold. Less than 30 seconds later, another message arrived. Tell me, Rachel. How much money have you lost so far? I sat down behind the counter and stared at the words. The amount was not public information. I had never shared it online. I had barely discussed it with anyone outside my accountant and a few close friends. Whoever sent the message knew details they should not know. That evening, Daniel returned with more news. He had been reviewing traffic logs connected to the attacks on my accounts. Most were hidden behind privacy tools. Most. Not all. One login attempt had originated from a coffee shop less than 3 miles from my store. The timestamp matched the same afternoon I received one of the anonymous messages. Suddenly the situation felt smaller. Closer. Real. Daniel looked at me carefully. Rachel, I think whoever is doing this believes they are smarter than everyone else. I knew exactly who that sounded like. Then he smiled slightly. And people who think they are the smartest person in the room usually make mistakes. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he was right. Maybe Vanessa had slipped. Maybe she would slip again. As I locked the shop that night, the humid Charleston air wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. The streetlights reflected off the harbor in the distance. Everything looked peaceful. Normal. But as I reached my car, I noticed an envelope tucked beneath the windshield wiper. My heartbeat immediately accelerated. There was no stamp. No address. Just my name written across the front in familiar handwriting. And the moment I saw it, I knew exactly whose mistake had finally landed in my hands. For a long moment, I simply stood beside my car staring at the envelope. The parking lot was empty except for a few vehicles scattered beneath the streetlights. A warm breeze drifted in from the harbor, carrying the scent of saltwater and rain. Everything around me felt ordinary. The envelope in my hand did not. I already knew the handwriting before I opened it. Vanessa had always written in exaggerated loops, every letter carefully shaped as if she wanted people to admire it. Even after years apart, I recognized it instantly. My pulse quickened as I slid a finger beneath the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting. No signature. Just one sentence typed in large black letters. You should have stayed where you belonged. I read it twice. Then a third time. The words themselves were not threatening. They were not illegal. But they carried something heavier than anger. They carried ownership. The same ownership that had poisoned our relationship for years. I folded the paper carefully and drove straight to Daniel's office. By the time I arrived, it was nearly 9 o'clock, but he was still there. He listened quietly while examining the note beneath a desk lamp. When I finished, he sighed. Rachel, this changes things. How? I asked. Because now she is getting emotional. I frowned. I do not understand. People who plan carefully usually avoid personal mistakes, he said. But emotions make people careless. His words stayed with me all weekend. The more I thought about them, the more they made sense. Up until now, whoever was behind this had remained hidden. Anonymous messages. Technical attacks. Rumors. Every move had created distance between the person responsible and the damage being done. But this letter was different. It felt personal. Impulsive. Human. On Monday morning, another surprise arrived. A woman named Claire Jensen entered the shop carrying a small package. She introduced herself as a delivery driver and asked if I was Rachel Morgan. When I said yes, she handed over a shipping receipt. "I think this belongs to you," she said. Inside the package was my missing backup hard drive. I stared at it in disbelief. It had disappeared the same night as everything else. "Where did you get this?" I asked. Claire explained that someone had paid cash to leave the package at a local shipping center. No return address. No identification. Just instructions for it to be delivered Monday morning. My heartbeat accelerated. Daniel examined the drive later that afternoon. Most of the files were still there. But something else had been added. Hidden deep inside the storage folders was a document that did not belong. When he opened it, both of us froze. It contained screenshots. Messages. Notes. Dates. Someone had been keeping records. Detailed records. At first I assumed they were records of my business. Then I noticed something disturbing. Many of the notes focused on me personally. Places I visited. People I met. Events I attended. The oldest entry was nearly 6 months old. I felt a chill travel through my entire body. This had not started with the break-in. It had started long before that. Someone had been watching my life unfold piece by piece. Daniel scrolled further down the document. Then he stopped. "Rachel," he said quietly. "You need to see this." Near the bottom was an upcoming date highlighted in red. It was exactly 3 weeks away. Beside it sat a single sentence. "Final humiliation planned." I stared at those words until they blurred. For the first time, I realized something important. This was not about revenge for the past. Whoever was doing this had not finished yet. In fact, they believed the worst part was still coming. For the rest of that day, I could not focus on anything else. The words, "final humiliation planned," echoed through my mind every few minutes. Every customer conversation felt distant. Every phone call sounded muffled. It was as if I had suddenly been given a glimpse of a storm approaching on the horizon, close enough to see but still too far away to stop. Late that afternoon, Daniel and I sat inside my office surrounded by invoices, shipping records, and printed screenshots. We had spent hours trying to understand what Vanessa's endgame might be. The more evidence we reviewed, the more obvious one thing became. She did not just want to hurt my business. She wanted an audience. Looking back, that realization should have been obvious. Vanessa had always cared about appearances. During our relationship, she treated every disagreement like a performance. Every accomplishment had to be displayed. Every conflict needed spectators. Validation mattered more to her than truth. That was when an idea began forming in my mind. At first it seemed ridiculous. Then it seemed risky. Then it started sounding possible. What if we give her exactly what she wants? I asked. Daniel looked up from his laptop. "What do you mean?" "An audience." He stared at me for several seconds before slowly leaning back in his chair. I could almost see the gears turning in his head. "Rachel," he said carefully, "I think you might be onto something." The next week became the busiest of my life. Publicly, I focused on rebuilding the store. I posted updates online. I shared restoration projects. I announced a special community appreciation event to celebrate the shop's recovery. Customers loved the idea. Local businesses offered support. Several Charleston influencers agreed to mention it on social media. The excitement grew quickly. Behind the scenes, however, Daniel and I were building something entirely different. We upgraded every security camera in the store. We added backup recording systems. We installed live stream equipment normally used for online auctions. Every angle of the showroom would be visible. Every conversation would be documented. Every second would be recorded. The event date happened to fall only 2 days before the mysterious date highlighted inside Vanessa's notes. That coincidence felt too perfect to ignore. The more publicity the event received, the more nervous I became. What if we were wrong? What if Vanessa never showed up? What if someone else had been responsible all along? Some nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering whether I was building an elaborate trap around nothing but assumptions. Then another anonymous message arrived. Big celebration coming up. It would be a shame if everyone saw who you really are. My fear vanished instantly. Because that message answered the question I had been asking for weeks. She was watching. She knew about the event. And most importantly, she could not resist involving herself. The following morning, I officially announced that the celebration would be live-streamed for customers across the country. Within 48 hours, thousands of people had already registered to watch. The numbers kept growing. Every new viewer increased my anxiety and my hope at the same time. Then, 3 nights before the event, a final message appeared on my phone. Unlike the others, it contained only 4 words. 4 words that made my heart race faster than anything else had so far. See you very soon. The morning of the event arrived with clear skies and a kind of nervous energy that made it impossible to sit still. I unlocked the shop before sunrise and stepped inside, immediately noticing how different everything looked. Fresh displays lined the walls. Restored antiques gleamed beneath carefully positioned lights. The damage from weeks earlier had been repaired as well as possible. To anyone walking through the front door, it looked like a celebration. Only a handful of people knew it was also a test. By 8 o'clock, Daniel and his team were checking camera feeds one final time. Small indicators glowed across multiple screens in my office. Every angle of the showroom was visible. Every microphone was functioning. Every backup system was online. Everything is ready, Daniel said. I nodded, though my stomach felt like a knot. What if she does not come? I asked. He smiled slightly. Rachel, people who crave attention rarely ignore an invitation. Throughout the morning, customers filled the store. Some came to shop. Others came simply to show support. Several local business owners stopped by. A reporter from a Charleston community publication interviewed me near the front display window. The live stream audience continued growing faster than anyone expected. 10,000 viewers became 20,000. 20,000 became 40,000. Every time I checked the numbers, they seemed higher. By noon, the atmosphere inside the store felt almost festive. Laughter drifted through the aisles. Conversations blended together. The steady sound should have reassured me. Instead, it made me more anxious. Because Vanessa had not appeared. 1 o'clock passed. Then 2. The event was scheduled to end at 4. A small voice inside my head began whispering that maybe I had been wrong. Maybe Daniel had been wrong. Maybe the messages, the notes, the planning document, and the evidence all pointed towards someone else. I hated how quickly doubt returned. Then at 2:37, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. My pulse immediately accelerated. The message contained only one sentence. I expected a bigger crowd. I stared at the screen. My hands went cold. She was watching. Somewhere nearby, Vanessa was watching everything unfold. I showed Daniel the message. His expression changed instantly. Good, he said. Very good. Good? I asked. It means she is close. The next 40 minutes felt longer than the previous 40 days. I smiled for customers. Answered questions. Signed receipts. All while constantly checking the entrance. Then, at exactly 3:19 in the afternoon, the bell above the front door chimed. The sound was ordinary. The reaction inside me was not. I looked up and saw her. Vanessa Reed stood just inside the entrance wearing a calm smile. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled. Her posture was relaxed. To everyone else, she probably looked like an ordinary visitor. But I knew her too well. I recognized the confidence in her eyes. The certainty. The belief that she was still controlling the situation. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she began walking slowly through the showroom, examining displays as if she had every right to be there. Around us, customers continued browsing, completely unaware of the history standing between us. Vanessa stopped beside a restored antique clock and smiled. "Looks like you recovered faster than I expected," she said softly. And in that instant, I realized something important. She believed she had already won. She had absolutely no idea what was happening around her. For a few seconds, I simply looked at her. Vanessa smiled as though we had bumped into each other by accident at a grocery store instead of standing in the middle of a situation she had spent months creating. Around us, customers continued browsing antique displays and chatting with one another. The live stream counter kept climbing on a monitor hidden inside my office. 50,000 viewers. Then 60,000. Then more. None of them knew what was about to happen. "You seem nervous," Vanessa said casually as she ran her fingertips along the edge of a display case. "Big event today." I forced myself to remain calm. "Business has been better lately." She laughed softly. "Has it?" There it was. The same tone I remembered from countless arguments years ago. The tone she used whenever she believed she held all. The cards. She began walking through the store, stopping occasionally to examine items she clearly had no interest in buying. Every movement felt deliberate. Every word felt rehearsed. She wanted me uncomfortable. She wanted me guessing. What she did not realize was that Daniel had already moved into position near the back office. Every camera remained active. Every microphone was recording. Most importantly, every live stream viewer was still watching. Vanessa eventually stopped near the center of the showroom. "You know," she said, lowering her voice, "I have to admit I am impressed. After everything that happened, I expected this place to be empty by now." My heart pounded harder. She was getting closer. Not to the truth. To revealing it. "Everything that happened?" I asked carefully. Her smile widened. "Come on, Rachel. You do not need to pretend with me." For the first time, I saw genuine satisfaction in her expression. She wanted credit. She wanted recognition. That was always her weakness. People who crave control eventually want acknowledgement for it. "You always thought you were stronger than everyone else," she continued. "You thought opening this shop would prove something." I remained silent. Letting her talk was harder than I expected. Every instinct told me to confront her. To demand answers. But Daniel's plan depended on patience. Vanessa took another slow step closer. "Do you know what the funny part is?" she asked. "You spent years trying to get away from me, and yet I still managed to become the most important part of your story." My pulse thundered in my ears. Nearby, several customers had begun noticing the tension. Conversations grew quieter. A few people glanced in our direction. Vanessa noticed it too, but interpreted it completely wrong. She thought people were becoming her audience. She thought she was commanding the room. "I kept waiting for you to figure it out," she said. "The emails. The reviews. The little surprises. Honestly, I expected you to catch on much sooner." My breath caught. There it was. Not a confession yet, but close. Very close. Then Daniel appeared from the office doorway holding a tablet. He looked directly at me, before turning the screen toward Vanessa. At first she seemed confused. Then her eyes moved across the display. I watched the confidence slowly disappear from her face. The livestream viewer count was visible in giant numbers across the screen. 78,000 people. Watching live. Watching everything. And for the first time since she walked through that door, Vanessa looked genuinely stunned. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument we had ever had. Vanessa stared at the screen in Daniel's hands as if the number might somehow disappear if she looked long enough. 78,000 viewers had already become more than 80,000, and the count continued climbing every few seconds. Around us, customers were no longer pretending not to notice. Several stood frozen beside display cases. Others quietly pulled out their phones. For the first time since walking into the shop, Vanessa seemed unsure of herself. "What is this?" she asked. Her voice had lost its confidence. Daniel answered before I could. "A live stream. It has been running all afternoon." I watched the color drain from her face. "You recorded me?" she said. "No," Daniel replied calmly. "You recorded yourself." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Vanessa laughed. It sounded forced. Thin. Unsteady. "You cannot be serious. I have not done anything." The words hung in the air. Unfortunately for her, they arrived only minutes after she had openly referenced emails, reviews, and incidents that nobody should have known about. Several people exchanged confused looks. One customer frowned. Another slowly shook his head. Vanessa noticed their reactions and immediately became defensive. "Oh please," she said, looking around the room. "Do not act like she is some innocent victim." I remained quiet. That was the hardest part. Every instinct wanted me to respond. But the more Vanessa talked, the more damage she created herself. "You all think she built this place alone?" Vanessa continued. "You think none of this would have happened if she had just listened?" The moment the words left her mouth, I saw realization flicker across her face. She understood she had said too much. But it was already too late. Daniel glanced at his tablet. The viewer count had passed 90,000. Comments were moving so quickly they looked like a waterfall. People had heard everything. Vanessa turned toward me. "This is your fault," she said. "You pushed me into this." That sentence revealed more than she intended. Several customers openly gasped. One woman near the entrance whispered, "Did she just admit it?" The atmosphere changed instantly. Vanessa could feel it. The room was no longer under her control. Neither was the audience. Panic began replacing confidence. "You do not understand," she said quickly. "I was trying to teach her a lesson. She needed to understand consequences." The second those words escaped, her eyes widened. She knew exactly what she had done. Daniel lowered the tablet slightly and looked at me. Neither of us needed to say anything. Months of anonymous messages. The hidden notes. The monitoring. The disruptions. The recovered files. And now her own statements. Piece by piece, she had assembled the evidence herself. A notification appeared on Daniel's screen. Then another. Then several more. Local reporters had joined the live stream. Community groups had begun sharing clips online. The audience crossed 100,000 viewers. Vanessa saw the number. Her shoulders visibly slumped. For the first time since I had known her, she looked small. Not because anyone had humiliated her. Not because anyone had attacked her. But because the story she had spent months constructing was finally collapsing under the weight of the truth. And standing there in the center of my shop, surrounded by witnesses both in person and online, she finally understood something I had realized long ago. Control disappears the moment other people can see what is really happening. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. After months of anxiety, suspicion, and constant uncertainty, the silence almost seemed unfamiliar. The live stream recording spread far beyond Charleston. Clips appeared on social media. Local news stations covered the story. Community groups discussed it. People who had never heard of my antique shop suddenly knew its name. What surprised me most was not the attention. It was the support. Messages arrived from across the country. Small business owners shared stories of their own struggles. Customers placed orders simply because they wanted to help. Strangers reminded me that setbacks do not define a person. How they respond to them does. The official investigation continued, and I provided every document, message, screenshot, and recording we had collected. For the first time, I no longer felt responsible for proving anything. The truth could stand on its own. Meanwhile, something remarkable began happening inside the shop. The same display cases that once sat empty were filled again. The same shelves that had reminded me of failure now held new inventory. Every week brought new customers. Some traveled hours just to visit in person. Others came because they had followed the story online and wanted to see the place for themselves. One afternoon, nearly a month after the event, I stood near the front window watching sunlight spill across the hardwood floor. The shop was busy. Conversations drifted through the aisles. A grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner. For the first time in a very long time, I felt completely at peace. Daniel walked in carrying 2 coffees and handed one to me. "You look different," he said. "Different how?" I asked. He smiled. Like someone who is finally done looking over her shoulder. I laughed because he was right. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped measuring my life by what Vanessa might do next. I had stopped waiting for another message, another surprise, another disruption. The fear that had followed me for months had gradually disappeared. Not because everything was perfect. Not because the past had vanished. But because I finally understood something important. Freedom is not the absence of challenges. Freedom is realizing that someone else's actions no longer control your future. Later that evening, after the last customer left, I locked the front door and turned off most of the lights. The shop settled into its familiar nighttime quiet. I paused near the entrance and looked around. Every restored piece. Every carefully arranged display. Every inch of that space represented years of effort. Yet the greatest thing I had rebuilt was not the business. It was myself. 5 years earlier, I had walked away from a relationship believing I was starting over. The truth was, I had only begun learning who I really was. Strength was not winning an argument. It was surviving one. Courage was not exposing someone else's choices. It was refusing to let those choices define me. As I stepped outside, the evening air felt cool and calm against my skin. The harbor lights shimmered in the distance. Somewhere behind me, the shop windows reflected a life I had fought hard to create. Vanessa had spent months trying to destroy what I built. In the end, she failed for a simple reason. She thought my greatest achievement was the store. She never realized my greatest achievement was becoming the kind of woman who could rebuild it.